welcome to another tutorial by me, Zabrant. Today we're going to be creating a coiling chocolate pour effect like the one you see in front of you. It's a special request from one of my Toonami patrons, William. Thank you very much for your continued support, and here is your special request tutorial. William's request is how to create a pouring chocolate effect, and this is the reference he gave me. As you can see, you get some nice pouring chocolate with this coiling effect as it's coming down, and he says he's able to achieve that in RealFlow, and he was asking how we do that in Houdini. First off, we'll start developing the effect in a simple test scene, and then move on to the scene where we're pouring some chocolate over some croissants. Sorry if I'm offending any French people, these were the most applicable models I could find. Okay, for the look development scene, I'll start from scratch of an empty scene. And I'll just get a box from the tab menu. Just creating some geometry of a box inside it. And I'm just going to scale this up and move it into position, because this is going to be our emitter. And for the size of the box, this is going to determine the initial shape of the liquid being poured. So we'll create a thin rectangle. I'll make it 0.1 by 0.2 by 2 meters. So it's not physical scale. We're going to be working in a larger scene than what would be realistic. And I'll just move this up to about 5 units. Like that. And then I'll jump up a level. And I'm not going to worry too much about the workflow on this because this is just an R&D scene. I just want to test some values. So we're going to go over to the particle fluid tab, and we'll select a emit particle fluid, select our box and hit enter. Let's give that a moment to cook. Hit L on the keyboard to sort that. I don't need the fluid interior right now, and I'm not even going to worry about the particle import. All I'm going to care about in the scene is about what's coming into the DOP network and what's happening in the DOP network. And we can get rid of this merge because I'm not going to create any other sources. And I can drop down a ground plane because I want something for the liquid to collide with as it goes down. Because now what we have is just a simple pouring liquid. So if we play that, we should get some water pouring down. Let's hit play and see that. See, it's coming down pretty fast, hitting the ground and spreading out like you would expect. Okay, I'm just going to stop that and rescale our domain. P on the keyboard, go to the volume tab, maybe make it 5 by 5 by 5 to start with. Zoom in, hit enter, and just make it a little bit bigger. And we can make it a bit wider, maybe just go 10 by 10. As long as the source is inside the container and that the container is lower than the ground plane. Also, this is very coarse at the moment. I'll set it lower, I'll set it to 0.05, just so we have a better representation, and I'm just gonna hit play now just to see what that looks like. Okay, that's looking a bit better. I am a little bit worried about visibility, so I'm just gonna change the particle representation to points and maybe scale it up to 5. And I'll just change the color of this ground plane as well, make it darker. Why is that not updating? Guess I have to go to the first frame, yes. Maybe a little lighter. There we go. And I'll hide the domain because that's just in the way now. Okay, hopefully that's clearly visible on the recording. Now we don't want a splashy liquid, we want something viscous. And To create a viscous simulation, you can go to the flip object and go to the physical tab and give it some viscosity value. Let's just start off with a value of something like 2000. As far as I know, the viscosity values in Flip and Houdini is based on real world values. So you can go look up those values online as like a good ballpark of where to start. For example, I think honey is something like 10,000. Let's just start with 2000 for now. 2000. And then on the solver, we need to turn on viscosity as well. So I'll turn on viscosity and hit play. And let's see what happens. I hit play on it now. You can see the motion's already changed a lot. And as it goes to the floor, we start getting this blob building up of our viscous liquid, as you would expect. Well, that's not too bad. We're already getting a little bit of coiling over there, which is nice to see. Now that we've got some basic viscosity set up, let's make sure that we've got our settings set up in the flip solver correctly. So the first thing I want to change is I want to set this to the swirly kernel. Again, if you're working with small scale liquids, swirly kernel is the better option because it's going to give you a smoother velocity field and a less noisy surface. And if you got a slow moving viscous liquid, you want the surface to be as smooth as possible, and you're going to get more accurate results on your viscosity. So I'll set that to swirly. Then the other thing that helps is usually turning off reseeding as well. So I'm going to turn that off. The fluid should do a pretty good job of maintaining its volume anyway because it is moving slower, and reseeding can cause some flickering and jittering when you're meshing if it's creating random points or adding points in areas where you weren't expecting it. So it's probably better to keep that turned off. The main factors in creating and controlling coiling pouring effects is the difference between the speed of the liquid coming down and the speed of the liquid that's on the collision surface, the actual speed that the liquid comes down, and the velocity and the thickness of the sheet that's being emitted. So if we look at what we've got at the moment with a viscosity of 2000, the liquid's pouring down and just kind of spreading out and not coiling at all. And I can bump up the resolution. Let's make it 0.025 and hit play again. And you can see there is more detail, but it's still just kind of spreading out. Let's kind of pause that and rotate. Yeah, so if we look at it from the side, it's more of the resolution, but we're not getting any sort of spreading. Now let me bump up the viscosity. I'll set it to 5000 and we'll let that cook. Okay, so this is what it looks like with a viscosity of 5000, and it's just a big blob spreading out. Now I think we will need more viscosity in the scene to get it to coil, but also we've doubled the resolution, but we haven't thinned out the emitter at all. So the actual sheet has technically become a thicker emission area. So I'll go back to our box, and then on the flip source I'm going to turn off the shell, and we're going to get a lot thinner stream emitting. And let's go back and simulate that, and I'll just simulate that before increasing the viscosity to so we can see the difference. Let's give that a moment to cook. Okay, so this is a thinner stream, and look at that, we're getting a really cool coiling effect. And the only thing that changed was the thickness of the emission. I thought I was going to have to go up on the viscosity as well, but I didn't even need to do that. Let's see this from a different angle as well. Hit play. And that's looking really cool. And you can see that buckling happening. Now, different ways to control this effect. If you start working with high viscosities, you can always start thinking about increasing the density of the fluid as well. That really applies when you start getting to really high viscosities, because you need more density, because that would make the fluid move faster even though it is very viscous, because viscosity does slow it down. So I can increase this to 2000 just to see if we can see a difference. And I'll let that cook again. Okay, yeah, you can already see the difference there, but let's hit play on that. So you can see it pushes down more because it's now heavier, and because it's heavier, you're getting higher frequency coils. Let me demonstrate some of the other factors I was talking about before. Just for fun, let's bump up the viscosity even higher now, make it 10,000. I'll go to the flip source and I'm going to give it some initial velocity. I'll make it a little bit more than gravity, so let's make it 10. Let's just play that and not add too many things at once. Give that a chance to cook. Okay, so that's what it looks like now. You can see it's still has that high coiling frequency, and it's spreading out more. And that initial velocity made a difference as well, because you can see if I pause it, it's going really fast right up all the way in there, and it's really folding up tightly. You can reduce the density or reduce that initial velocity, and you get back to the slower, bigger coils. So the last thing I want to show, and to show that, I am gonna just pull back on some of these values again. So the density back to 1000, and go to our box, and I'm just going to set that to -5. But then another trick to help with coiling effects is just get a point velocity. All I want to do is I want to add a little bit of instability into that initial velocity, because right now it's just kind of shooting down. So I want to keep the incoming velocity, but I want to add a little bit of curl noise. You can see the difference if I display it there. Straight lines and a little bit of noise. But it's gonna be a bit strong, that, so I'll reduce it to something like 0.2. The idea is just to introduce a little bit of instability, just to kind of help flip create some interesting variations in the shapes. Now let's capture this one for one last time and see what that looks like. Okay, and this is the new simulation. You can see the coils are a bit larger and slower because we reduced that initial velocity and we reduced the density, so it's not pushing down on itself as much. But I kept the really high viscosity just to kind of see what that looks like. And if you look carefully, you'll notice a little bit of sway in that initial motion, and that's from that curl noise, just kind of offsetting the positions, just bringing in some variation so everything doesn't look as CG and perfect. Now bear in mind these values that we've picked might be fairly high and maybe not fully realistic, but then we're working at a scale where this is 2 meters long. So this is really one massive sheet of chocolate. Okay, now let's take what we learned and apply that to our shot. And the scale of that shot is going to be a little bit different to this one. And I did that on purpose so we can see how we can adjust our values to compensate. Okay, so this is a shot that I pre-built. It's got a camera setup and some lights, and I've got the stack of low poly croissants in there, but they're good enough to use for collisions. If I turn off texture, as you can see, that's kind of the geometry we're working with. And I just kind of stack those up. And the scale of it is, again, we're working at a larger scale than what would be physically accurate, just because working at such a small scale, if this was real scale, would be a bit small for Flip to handle. So it's easier to work at larger scales, even though it's not realistic. You can always speed up or slow down the simulation if it doesn't feel like it's sitting right for the scale of the scene. You can see if I middle click on this, the whole thing is about 5 by 2 by 3 meter long stack of croissants. So let's go back out. Then I've got just a little backdrop in there. Then inside this node called chocolate is a whole setup. So I'll go back to the first frame and just delete all of this, and let's see if we can rebuild this all from scratch. First thing we're going to want to do again is create an emitter. So I'll get a box. And I'm actually going to make the emitter slightly differently to what I did in my pre-prepared scene, because I realized I can do it more simply and I was overcomplicating it. So for the box, we're just going to make it 0.5 by 0.2 for now by 0.01, like really thin, because I want to take advantage of the shell on the Flip emission source. So we get this little flat grid over there, or this little flat rectangle, and I'm just moving it back to the origin and getting a transform. And I'm going to lift it up to what would be more or less its initial position. Shift it over, and it's going to kind of just be the starting point for our animation. It's a bit thin to see, so I'm just going to turn on points. There it is over there. And I want it to start around there, and I'm just going to rotate it sideways like that. And we want the source to be off camera, that's why I lifted it high as well. So starting off camera, started around there, I think. Then this is our initial position. I'll just call it init and get another transform. So see, my timeline goes from 951 to 1100, and I'm using this section as pre-roll, and my shot really starts at 1001, because if you remember the reference, the pour is already happening while when we cut into the shot. So now on this node I want to add some animation, but I'd also like the centroid just to be in the middle. So I'll just use this expression for that. That's $CEX, $CEY, $CEZ. And that should snap our pivot to the center of the object. Turn off points again, and I'll control click to add a transform key, go to the end of the timeline, and control click. I'll just go there and control click again. I just want to have everything keyed, and I know it's already linear, so it's just going to be a linear move going across like that, which is exactly what I want. So that's our initial animation, and let's get a flip source to start building the emitter from that. Oh man, my scene crashed. Okay, I'll be back. Okay, I've got the scene back. Pretty much sure this is where I left off. create a flip source, and this time I want to use the shell thickness. So I'm going to turn that on. We'll dial that in once we set up the rest of everything, so I'll just leave it like that for now. Drop down to null. I'll call it source. And we're going to need a dot network to simulate this in, so I'll get a dot network, call it flip dop, and dive inside and just drop down all we need for the flip simulation. So that's a flip solver, a flip object, some gravity, and a volume source. We can also go ahead and get a merge and add a ground plane, because I modeled it so that the ground's at 0, just in case anything misses the croissants, so it can fall on the ground. Like that. And then what are we going to set up? Let's hook up that flip source. So we'll get flip source, and I'll point that all the way up to source, like that. And then our flip object shouldn't bring in anything into the simulation. And before we set up the rest of the simulation, let's just set up our croissant as a collision. So we'll get an object merge. And for the object merge, I'll just bring in the croissants. And I just need their out null for that. And I'm going to be a bit lazy on this one and just, with my display on that, go to collision and create a static collision for them. Just so it sets up the stuff that I was going to make anyway, and I think I've made enough collision objects in tutorials. And then on there, I just want to hook up the resolution of that to the particle separation. Paste relative preferences. And I want to show the collision object and just change the color so it's not the same color as the particles, just to make sure that it is working. Super low res at the moment, but it is working, so that's good. And I'll hide that again. And on the guides, I just want to go to this. I want to set it to points, particles, and that's it. Just so it's a bit smaller, I can read it a bit easier. And I might have to change my defaults in the scene as well. Set it to points and set it to 5. Okay, so we've got the bare bones of the simulation in there. That can move up there, that can move up there, that can be deleted, that can be removed. Hit L, resort that. It's looking better, but I prefer it the other way around. And if I hit play, we should just get some liquid coming down very quickly and pouring away as expected. So to start with, let's just drop our resolution to something more reasonable. I think the scene is a little bit smaller, so even a resolution of 0.02, something like that, would be really quick. So let me copy that, and I'm going to paste it into particle separation. And I also want to paste it into voxel size. But then I also want to get the grid scale for voxel size. And I'm just going to set my display over there. And I want to multiply particle separation by the grid scale. And that's going to give the voxel size. So we have the correct voxel size for our grid scale. And now we can play with this value. And I still want to get really thin. Set it to 0.1. And the reason I'm using shell thickness on this one is, if I just go a bit closer, if I just use a box with shell thickness, I get these rounded corners, which I want anyway. You'll see in my other setup I was actually modeling that in and not using a box. But I think this is just a little bit easier to get it that way. Okay, now we've got a little bit more resolution on our simulation. I'll call this flip source. Go to the flip object and I'll go to physical tab and give it some viscosity. Now again, I know the scene is smaller, so I'm just going to start off with a viscosity of 2000. And I'll keep the density at 1000. And I'll go to our flip solver and I'll turn off particle separation. Under the volume tab, I'll set it to the swirly kernel. And what else do I need to do? I need to turn on viscosity. Okay, so let's hit play on that and see what it looks like. That's not looking too bad at all. We're already getting some interesting motion right off the bat. And you can see viscosity of 2000 looks a lot more viscous in this scene than what it did in our R&D scene. The reason for that is the scene scale is a lot smaller. So even though you can set it up with physical values, and I just need to fix this bounding box and hide it, even though you can get physical values for viscosity, if you're not working at a physical scale, you need to customize your viscosity anyway, or kind of cheat your values. And sometimes you're going to do this for your own reasons, and sometimes you're not going to have a choice. Like, it's just scene scale is always going to affect whatever you're doing in any simulation. Okay, oh, and I wanted to hide that as well. Oh, and I can actually hide the ground as well. I know where it is. Okay, so it's coming in with a lot of bend, and I want to add some velocity. So I'll get a point velocity. And this time I'll just add that downward velocity in there. And let's start off at the same value as gravity, or just a little bit higher at 10. And I'm going to already add that little bit of curl noise, and I'm going to make it even less strong than in the other one, because I know the scene is smaller. I'll set it to 0.1. I think because the other one was 0.25, right? I think. Either way, we'll find out soon enough if it's too strong. And the simulation is still very coarse, so I'm going to set it to 0.01. And let's hit play on that and see what it does. Okay, we immediately have some issues there. And I suspect, oh, I know what it is. By default, the point velocity tries to compute velocity, which we just want to turn off and to keep it incoming because it's sourcing those points differently every frame. And that also reminds me, I want to jitter the seed, so I just want to set $T to seed, so I get a different seed every frame as well. And that should be the basic emitter. Let's hit play, see what that does. It's coming down in a lot straighter line. It's kind of curling around the side. There's a few drips falling off there. Let's go back to our camera. And that's already looking pretty good. What also helps with these sort of simulations is to, if you want to visualize what it's doing a bit more clearly, is let's turn on the surface and hide the particles. So you get a decent representation of how it's behaving. You can see where it's curving, which you might not always be able to see just looking at the points. So that's looking pretty good. The emitter is a little bit jaggy. I think everything's coming down a little bit fast. And I think it can still be a little bit thinner, and I think the scene will benefit from slowing everything down. Like, everything is happening fairly quickly. It's not very smooth. And what I did in the previous scene is I set gravity down to -5, and I've also set this downforce to -5, effectively halving it, slowing everything down. And I think the shell thickness is too much, so I'm going to halve that as well. And I already like the viscosity at 2000, so I'm not going to change that. So let's hit play, see what this looks like now. It's looking pretty good. I would like it to come down a little bit straighter though. Actually, let me just check. Like, this is probably realistic the way it's lagging behind. I just want to check what this emission is actually looking like. On my previous one, I got a lot of jagging on the sides. And it might be easier to see with smaller particles actually. See if we got the amounts right. So you can see if I stop it there, or hopefully this shows up. So everything looks good in this area once it's landed, but it is a little steppy. Like, if you look carefully enough to slide it, you can see the stepping as it comes down. Set that back to 5. And that's going to show up in the meshing, and it is kind of hard to get out. So let's see what we can do to try and improve that. What we can do is, we've got this. Let's change every frame it does. Let's make this time variant if we're going to use it. So you can either use this timescale or just turn this off completely and hope the emitter is long enough. So if I hit play, you can see this is actually, I'm going to have to thin them out again. You can see if I turn that off, the reason I made the height of this emitter pretty long was because I knew it was coming down fast and I wanted enough particles to come down fast. So you can see I don't actually need that seeding there, because this is actually looking better and less steppy, because the points are being emitted more equally. A problem this does introduce though is, if you look at our geometry there, you can actually see all of them there. Like, it's stair stepping, which is bad. Gonna have to try and get that out of the mesh. Now I'm gonna run with this one, otherwise you can ignore this bit and turn time scaling offset back on. But what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna introduce the velocity from the movement. I'm gonna go to the box and get a trail and just compute the velocity of the trail. Say with the trail, and just say compute velocity. And I'm going to use the attribute transfer to copy the velocity back to the flip points. And I'm just going to copy B. And let's see if that's working. Turn that on. Yeah, you can see they have some velocity now. And if I just turn that on and off, you'll see a slight shift. So now we're compensating for the velocity a little bit in our emission. That should give us a straighter emission coming down, which should help with the stepping. You can see, apart from the first frame, it's definitely a lot better than what it was. You still pick it up a little bit at the beginning, because the velocity kicks in a couple of frames. But then that looks pretty good to me. Hopefully it's okay for the simulation as well. And I like this, but let's see if we can get it to keep coiling with even less viscosity. Set this down to 1000. Hit play, see if it still gives us any coiling effects. Yeah, it's still working and it's kind of blending together a little bit quicker. I like the coiling though, so maybe somewhere in between is best, so I'll go for 1500. Go back up, see if we can get this guy a little bit thinner even. And I think this is probably a good point to just up the resolution and cache this out. Oh, I need to change. Let's check. So the first few frames should still run quickly at a higher resolution anyway. Just want to see what the stepping is looking like. So again, you can clearly see it on these first few frames, but that's in the pre-roll, so hopefully it's not a big issue. You can see it a little bit still. But let's see if we can fix that in meshing. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'll keep the new resolution. Go, oh, that's showing everything, hide everything else. See if I can get this emitter even a little bit thinner, because why not? Nice thin emission. And then it's probably a good time to start caching out our simulation, so I'll get a .io. Get the flip dop, and I want to get the flip object. And let's select flip fluid. And I want to compress that guy before it gets cached, so I'll get the fluid compress. And for the fluid compress, I also just need to copy the resolution. So I'll copy the particle separation, paste that in the compression. And then because I know there's a chance I might want to retime the simulation later, I'm going to particle motion behavior, turn on IDs. And also because of that, I'm gonna turn off cull bandwidth because I know it's a thin, small scale fluid, so I want to keep all the points. You could make a case for only caching out the points and losing the other velocities for this, but for now I'll just do that. I've got enough disk space to cache out the volumes as well anyway. Okay, so that's ready to cache. So we'll get a cache node. In my case, I've got a custom cache node that just caches stuff to the right directories. And I'll call this choc titsum. Set it to load from disk. I'll cache that out and be back in a couple of minutes. Okay, the simulation cached out, and this is what it looks like. It looks a bit different to my previous one, but it's a thinner stream and some different settings. But I like the look of this one as well. And I'm gonna go ahead and mesh this and walk you through the meshing process. Okay, so back in the scene, all I put down already is I'm unpacking the points and I'm just visualizing the speed with CD so we can see a bit more clearly what's going on. I'm gonna go for a custom meshing solution, just setting it up with some standard VDB nodes and not using the particle fluid mesher, just because it's got a bunch of settings that we don't need, and something like this usually needs a lot of custom tweaks, so sometimes it's easier to mesh something like this with a string of nodes instead of one uber node. So I'll get a VDB from particle fluid, plug that into the particles, and it disappears because we need to set a p-scale. I'm just going to turn off simulation for now so I can copy this expression to copy the particle separation and paste it into particle separation. And if we give that a moment to cook, we should see our base mesh. And it's looking fairly clean, which is promising. I can turn that back on again, or leave it off, it doesn't matter at this point. So the next thing I want to do is I want to turn on limit refinement and keep it to 0. for slow moving viscous meshes, it's usually better to turn off this as it reduces some flickering you may get. It's probably a good point to have a closer look at this. So this is the VDB is generating, getting some cool shapes in there. So all in all, it's looking pretty nice. Obviously we've got a lot of smoothing to do on this. It's getting a little thin in some of these areas, which might cause us some problems, so we'll see if we can deal with that. And it is fairly thin in general, so let's see what happens when we started smoothing out some of this detail. So usually I like dropping this influence value. It is going to make it more noisy though. Let's see it. In this case it's not too bad. What if we go down all the way to 2? You can see it gets more coarse, but it does keep some of the finer details. And like, if we know we're gonna smooth it a lot anyway, it does sometimes help to just keep that. So what I'd like to do is just get a VDB smooth SDF. I'm just gonna copy it because I'm gonna set up the fairly standard workflow of smoothing and dilating. So that's just a smooth dropped in there, mean smooth. Okay, so do 4. I'm gonna hook up another one, make this one a Laplace, keep it to 4 as well. And the difference is the Laplacian and the mean curve flow do a better job of maintaining the curvature of the surface, and mean is a more general smooth, and Gaussian is a more general smooth as well, but it's more aggressive. You can see it does a good job of cleaning up the main mesh, but you do lose a lot of detail. We'll go back to mean for now, and let's just check the difference if we set this back and set this to something like 3 again. See, it doesn't make a huge difference. All we're trying to do is see what's going to give us the cleanest mesh. So I'm going to get a VDB reshape. And I'm going to stick that in front of the first smooth. And I'm going to dilate by 1. And after the smooth, I'm going to erode again by 1. So let's see the difference with and without. Not a major difference. In fact, all we're doing is we're losing a bit of detail, which I don't like. But our first goal with this is just to get a smooth meshed version that's acceptable. So let's convert this to geometry with a VDB convert. Set it to poly soup and set the adaptivity 0.05, just enough so it starts cleaning out that surface for us, because that also helps smooth the geometry for us, because it's taking away some of that detail. So we can see, just looking at the mesh, and let's see if I turn the lighting on. It's gone all dark on me, and that one blows out completely. Never mind. But just looking at this geometry, everything looks fairly smooth in this area. The stuff going down needs a little bit of work. See, it's a little bit jaggy, and I think that's coming from the emission along the sides. The surface isn't looking too bad, although it's not great, and we can see a little bit of that stepping, which is annoying, but we did know that it might be there. So what we can do to try and mitigate that is get another smooth, and I'll do it in between the reshapes, I think. So I'll copy that one, set it to Gaussian. Just make it really strong. Something like 6 and 2 voxel filter. Just really aggressive smooth. And you can see how much that smoothed it out. Still you can see a little bit of stepping, which I'd say try and render test that and see if it's visible or not, and if it's not, it's not a problem. But we've lost all the other details, so what we need to do is create a mask so that this only affects the areas we want. So I'll just go back to the camera view, make a box, hit enter so I can see the bounds, shift it up to the area I want to smooth, and just try and isolate that part of it, like so. And I'll go a bit further, set the points so that it doesn't recoup the volume. Jump to the end because we're going around the curve there. And I just want to create another one of these. Rotate it, move it in there. Just trying to more or less target that area where the stream is coming down. Something like that. Just check that we're actually inside it. Yeah, to shift both of them over. And then just boolean them together. So you've got one object that's solid. Set it to union. And create a VDB from that. VDB from polygons. And that can be a density. And we can add a little bit more resolution than that. And smooth that with a regular VDB smooth. The reason I'm smoothing it with the VDB smooth is to soften the edges, because that is essentially our fall off. And you can kind of see it there, but I'm a little bit worried that the smooth doesn't have enough external voxels to work with, so I'm going to increase the external banding. And that's just the empty voxels created around the volume. And you can usually see it, if you see a difference, can't really see a difference there, so it's probably fine. I'll smooth it even more as well. So you can usually see it if it looks like your volume's starting to clip, or if you're using it as a mask and your mask looks like it's clipping but you're expecting it to be smooth. And then it's pretty simple to apply the mask. You stick it into the second input of your smooth, and I just want to make sure it's the one with the Gaussian smoothing. And you can immediately see the effect. This is where the really strong smooth is being applied. And that's the fall off, where it's not being applied anymore. So I definitely want a bigger fall off. So I'll smooth that a bit more. Maybe even make that a Gaussian. Might even help to drop the resolution. Maybe that was too much. 0.75, and then I can probably move that box down a bit. Just get it somewhere around there. Maybe something like that. And then this one could probably come down a bit as well. Okay, now I got a nice soft fall off. And then let's just reapply that. And that should be good enough, I think. Now we're still applying the mean smooth to everything as well. We still have the reshape, and then a never plus smooth. So this main surface coming down is a lot smoother than what it was. And that's going to be important for rendering, because any artifacts in there is going to be very noticeable. Again, and other things you can try is maybe actually upping this voxel scale. So your voxels are bigger compared to your points, so you're going to get a softer result. So the strategy would be to sim at an even higher resolution and then mesh it like it's lower resolution so that it just have better coverage to begin with, because that's usually the main issue. The other tactic you could use is trying to mesh the actual fluid surface instead. So you could do that by getting a primitive if you just want to visualize that surface. Get a blast. Isolate the surface, say delete non-selected, and if you go to the volumes tab, you can visualize your surface as an SDF, so it's hidden by default. And you can see the surface on this doesn't look too bad either. So you can always try meshing that instead. For example, run the surface through this whole setup and let's see what we get. I think that Gaussian smooth really aggressive on it. Let's bypass that as well. And you can see the surface is really smooth on this. But I think what's also happening is it's slightly lower resolution. That's 0.01. Yes, okay. So this does come in at a lower resolution than what the particles come in. So you can use this as a tactic. And this is what I kind of meant by setting this resolution lower as well. So let's kind of try that now. And these are all different options which are worth running through. Just see the difference, 0.075. Set the voxel scale to 1. You can see it became a little bit softer because there's less voxels, meaning all the smooths and everything else is going to affect it a bit more, but it does mean your mesh is a little bit more low res. The other thing you could do as well to blend everything together a bit better is get a wrangle or a bop and just multiply the p-scale before it goes into the mesh, because this uses p-scale to determine the size. So you can say add p-scale and just multiply that by say 1.5. Just to blend all those points together more. That should give you a more solid surface. And you might be able to play with some of these settings again now. Maybe up the influence scale. Lower the actual droplet scale. I think if you up the droplet scale, it's going to become a bit coarser. Yeah, it does. And if we lower it, it should be a bit smoother. It looks that way, but we are getting back to kind of having the same sort of dents that we had before. So let's try this. Then again, I'll dilate this a little bit. Apply the really aggressive smooth on it. Get another mean smooth in there. Reshape it back down. A little extra smoothing from that, and then meshing it. And that should be a pretty clean mesh. To see what a different frame looks like, I'll jump to about somewhere right at the beginning. I mean, that's looking pretty good. It is fairly soft, but then I probably want to run this a little bit more high res. Can't remember if I mentioned on my machine this ran in about 20 minutes. So I can easily up the resolution of this a bit, and that gives you more space to play with the meshing as well. Okay, I'm happy with this one and happy to cache it out. So I'm going to leave this one here, and because the video is getting a bit long, and I'll play out with the mesh. Cool, thank you for watching, bye. If you enjoyed this video and you want to see more like it, follow me on Vimeo or have a look at my Patreon page. And if you're not a patron yet and you find this video helpful, please consider subscribing. And as always, to all my patrons, thank you very much for your continued support. That's all from me. Bye.